Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller here along with Robert Glasscock. Thank you so much for listening to us. We have a great question that I think Robert is going to have a very interesting answer to. This came from somebody who went to the funastrology.com website and up on the upper left clicked the orange button and sent us this message.
Hey Thomas, it's Tiffany. Hope you're doing well. I have a quick question for you. I heard something the other day about Pluto being void of course. We are always talking about the moon being void of course, but what are your thoughts on planets being void of course? Thanks.
Great question. In fact, I think it's maybe the second time we've been asked this question about void of course planets. Void of course only applies in horary astrology. It is never used in natal astrology. And the reason for this is that in horary astrology, the moon shows the immediate dynamic in the situation by the house placement of the moon in horary, and of course by the signs and aspects it makes. But it's the house placement that's really crucial, and this is only in horary. The moon, if the moon fails to make a Ptolemaic aspect, namely the conjunction, the sextile, the square, the trine, or the opposition. There are only 5 Ptolemaic aspects, and those are the only ones that we use in horary. Now, there are moments where you can revert to other aspects, but primarily that's the way horary works. So the moon, if it does not make an aspect, a Ptolemaic aspect, before leaving the sign that it is in, and this is only in horary, then it is void of aspects in the course of its motion. In horary astrology, a planet is only allowed to move the entire distance through the sign it is in to form aspects with other planets, but no planet in horary is allowed to leave the sign it is in and go into another sign to make an aspect. So the term void of course means the moon is void of aspects during the course of its motion. That's what it means. And if in horary the moon fails to make a Ptolemaic aspect before it leaves the sign it is in, it's called void of course, which means in horary only that the querent is either at the end of the situation and there's nothing that they can do either way to alter the outcome, or it means that the situation is essentially a done deal, so to speak. So that's the only time you use void of course. In natal astrology, when she just asked about the Pluto void of course, well, Pluto, of course, is the slowest moving archetype we have, and even in a natal horoscope, Pluto doesn't make aspects to other planets. Other planets make aspects to Pluto. They're all either applying or leaving an aspect to Pluto, but it's not the other way around because the fastest moving planets, obviously, in natal astrology. So the question about any planet other than the moon being void of course is a non sequitur in astrology because you'd never use void of course in natal astrology. The same is true in horary. As you know, we have specific rules. Another rule in horary, if the moon is in the via combusta, which is a segment of the zodiac between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, then the moon is in the via combusta. And the horoscope is not to be read when the moon is in the via combusta. This is only in horary, not in natal astrology. If you have your moon in between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, your moon is not in the via combusta for natal purposes. This is only in horary. So I think that people who have this question it needs to read a little bit more about horary astrology. And for example, don't take my word for this, the void of course moon and planets only being void of course in horary. Mark Edmund Jones and other astrologers, point out the same thing. But I think that's where the confusion comes. So you really don't have a void of course Pluto in any case. And you certainly don't have it in anything other than horary.
Now let's take this to the topic of transits, because obviously my daily podcast, the Fun Astrology Podcast, is based on transits, what's going on in the sky today or tomorrow or the next day. And in just looking at transit astrology, if you will, or what's up there right now, there is definitely a movement of people who follow the void of course moon. So today, if the moon is in Scorpio, for example, and tonight it moves into Sagittarius, and there are no more aspects between now, let's say when we're talking this morning, And tonight, when it moves into Sagittarius, that's considered void of course from a transit perspective today. And a lot of people, I know people who do this. I worked with one couple for a little while, and they followed the void of course precisely. They were like, well, let's see, let's have a conversation about this, but let's do it tomorrow because the moon is void of course today. What do you think about that?
I think it's fine because in essence, that's a form of horary astrology. What you're doing is looking at the moment, and the moon is void of course, every few days, really. So that's not a time necessarily to start anything just under a transiting void of course moon. I wouldn't start anything under that. But that's from an horary standpoint. If you ask a question at that moment, for example, you couldn't read the chart because the moon would be void of course. That would be an horary question. On the other hand, if you're just sitting there at home and you've got a schedule and you're thinking about having a meeting or something with somebody, you can look and say, let's not have it that day because the moon's void of course. That's an horary decision, basically, on the current transiting movements of the planets. But the question about Pluto being void of course, that extrapolates the idea of void of course into an area that it never belonged, and it's not even legitimate.
Well, let me ask you this, because we are born so the natal chart is obviously a precise moment in time, right? It's a snapshot of a moment of transit astrology. It's a moment of, process of today. Boom, there you are. How is that different?
A natal chart is a frozen snapshot of a moment in time. And if it's for a natal chart, a birth horoscope, void of course does not apply in a natal horoscope, period. So you can observe the fact that somebody's born with their moon in a very late degree and the moon doesn't make any aspects. You can note that, but it's not nearly as important in natal astrology as it is in horary astrology, because the horary question pertains only to one very specific situation, not your whole life. So that's primarily the difference, because there are astrologers who don't know any better, thinking, oh my God, my moon is in the Via Combusta, it's at 4 Scorpio, that's horrible. Not in natal astrology, it isn't. You only use the Via Combusta as one of the considerations before judgment, they call it, in horary. In horary astrology, as you know, a horoscope has to meet certain requirements. You cannot have less than 3 degrees rising in horary. Otherwise, the question is premature. There are not enough elements in place for astrology to give you an answer if you have 3 degrees or less of a sign rising in horary. Or conversely, if you have more than 28 degrees, or 27 degrees rising in horary, again, you can't read the chart. In that situation, it's because the moon is, let's say, void of course, and it doesn't aspect anything before leaving the sign that it is in. Therefore, the dynamic of the question, as far as that horary chart is concerned, can't be read because there's no dynamic. The moon doesn't make any Ptolemaic aspects before leaving the sign, and that element alone will factor into the question and its answer. But that's only in horary, never, never, never in natal. And so people, I guess, I don't know where, I've heard this idea about, say, Pluto or another planet being void of course, and I'm thinking, where do you get that? I don't know who's teaching this today.
I don't know either.
To me, it shows a kind of fundamental misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the differences between horary and natal astrology. I think it's fine, as you're talking about. I don't want to do this today because the moon's void of course. That's in essence an horary decision. You're not talking about somebody's life, their natal chart. You're talking about a specific moment, a question. Really, but I have an option. I can take this meeting today or I can take it tomorrow. Well, the moon's void of course today. Let's take it tomorrow. And that's a logical assumption to make, I think.
Boy, this brings up so many other things that I'm thinking about. Okay, let me ask you this. First of all, electional astrology. This is something that a lot of the Hellenistic ancient astrologers discuss and teach, is that you look at the chart and determine the best time for something. Let's say you wanted to get married. Okay, what's the best day for marriage? You look ahead, you find Venus, you find various other aspects maybe related to the 7th house, etc., and you pick the best time. What's the difference between that and horary?
Well, electional is when you have an option for choosing a time to begin something, the birth of something, and that's what astrology charts is the births of ideas or businesses or the birth of a human being and so on. So, what was your question?
What's the difference of this? Like, should we do the meeting this afternoon or tomorrow? No, and saying that, well, the void of course moon this afternoon, let's move it to tomorrow. That's a horary kind of thing. Is that the same as an electional kind of thing?
They're related, but when you say what's the best time to have this meeting, and you're just looking at, say, at the one of those calendars that shows you the void of course moon. If you have an electional, if you have an option, why start something under a void of course moon? Because that in effect becomes like an horary question. Should I start now or should I start there another time? So that's playing around with observing the aspects and realizing if I start this meeting, if this is the first meeting and it's an important meeting, I don't want to start it under a void of course moon. I'd rather start it under a new moon, a transiting moon that's going to make some aspects, that has some dynamic to it. That's all. So it's very akin to horary, electional is, but that's completely different than somebody's natal chart, a birth chart. That's for a whole lifetime that you're looking at. And there you don't have a void of course moon. You don't have to consider these things before judgment. Any natal chart can be read. Not every horary chart can be read. And they're very specific rules. And if you ignore them, you do it at your own peril in horary astrology, because you're going to probably come up with wrong answers when you do. I just did an horary for somebody, I guess, a couple of days ago, and she had some business decisions to make between staying where she is, or she has a new job opportunity, but it too, she knows the boss, the new boss, and she likes him very much. He's been a friend of hers for years, but he's also a tyrant at work. So she's torn. And basically what the horary chart said is, if you can do this, split the time, because she actually mentioned, or maybe could I split the time and anyway, keep this job, but also take this second opportunity. And that's exactly what the chart suggested that she do, because they both had equally favorable aspects, which means either option is basically going to be equal. Both had bad things and both had good things. And the actual suggestion from the chart was absolutely split your jobs, and you'll be able to take both of them and give yourself a little more time that way to experience both jobs. And you'll see if this new job is going to work out for you or not, rather than, and I said, and be ready. At the end of the letter I wrote her back was, and be ready to say yes to this new opportunity on Thursday. Very specific. She wrote me back and said, you are magic. Well, I'm not. And astrology is magic. The meeting is Thursday, and that is when I have to give them the decision. And you told me exactly what I've been thinking is the best course of action. So there, astrology, a total stranger, astrology gave her the answer, and it turned out to be not only the best answer, but also the one that instinctively she was going for.
Yeah,
so in that
amazing.
case, astrology supported her. But I love this. This is why I love horary so much. When that chart said Thursday, and she wrote back, and this was all from symbolic directions, Thomas. This had nothing to do with the ephemeris. This is all techniques from horary astrology only, and they're symbolic. And sometimes horary timing is very specific, such as it was in her case. Other times it's more symbolic. It can say, look, this doesn't look like it's going to mature or eventuate for, say, 6 months. All right, that's impractical under your question. But what astrology then is saying is act as if you had as long as 6 months to make this decision, which means suddenly the panic is gone. The pressure is gone. Oh, you mean I've got 6 months? Yes, you do. So that gives you horary timing is very interesting. Sometimes, like with Thursday, it can be extremely specific. Other times it's not. And that's because different situations have different levels of clarity. Some are befogged by all sorts of peripheral considerations, and other questions are very clear, and astrology shows that too. But that's horary, and natal astrology is a different branch and has different rules.
Okay, so we've defined here via combusta is in horary, is not in natal. Void of course is in horary, not in natal. Let me ask you just about two other areas that some people are probably clicking and thinking about. What about the Cazimi and then the under the beams? So this is, Cazimi is obviously when a planet is, say, 16 or 17 minutes away from the sun, that it is emphasized. And then under the beams, I think, is like 16 degrees away from, on either side of the sun, that they say the sun washes out a planet. Either of those factor in?
I suppose. I've never really, certainly with Cazimi, you have a tremendous emphasis on the planet archetype that conjuncts the sun that closely. But in fact, it's more like a rarefied conjunction. So it still is a conjunction. I have my sun conjunct Neptune, but it's by 4 degrees. It's still a close conjunction, but it's not Cazimi. And the under the beams is the same sort of consideration. They're sort of very specialized conjunctions. At least that's the theory. I personally have never found it particularly useful or practical. It's there, and you can, if you know about it, you can think about it and even explore it with the client. But as I say, over the years, I've just never gotten anything very helpful or specific from Cazimi.
But as far as our discussion of horary versus natal, horary and natal both would interpret them as part of the interpretation, I guess.
I've never read about Cazimi and horary. I never have. I think it's, I'm sure people use it that way, but I've only read references to Cazimi or under the beams in natal astrology. It's not a consideration, really.
Okay.
In horary.
In horary. All right. Well, and I would just chip my 2 cents worth in because I have one of each. Remember, I have 3 planets, the Sun, Mars, and Neptune, on the same degree. The Sun and Mars are Cazimi. And I can tell you that, okay, but when you have the Sun and Mars together, it's going to be hot no matter where you are. And Neptune is technically under the beams. It's just outside that 16 or 17 minute mark. And I can tell you Neptune is very alive and well in my life, conjunct that Sun and Mars. So I don't know, same deal. All right, Robert, thank you for this. Tiffany, hope that clears it up. Thank you so much for a great question. If you'd like to talk to Robert individually about your Cazimi or your beams, take a look at the show notes. The direct link to reach him is there, as well as all the other things we have going on, including the YouTube channel, the Discord channel, and now our book club that Kristen Lawhead is doing for a book that we are going through of sun signs, reverse engineering for the rest of 2023. And by the way, we're going to take up horary in the next episode as well. So we'll see you there. Thank you so much for listening.